Welcome, and thank you for joining us for Contemporary Art Taos 2020, the Artist Interview Series. This series consists of short interviews between myself and the artists in this exhibition and is released twice a month for the duration of the show. I'm Nicole, Curator of Exhibitions and Collections at the Harwood Museum of Art, and joining me today is Izumi Yokoyama, who has an original commission in this show called Marionette. Welcome, Izumi.
Thank you so much for having me today, and thank you everybody for checking the video.
So let's talk about the install of this. I have a sketch behind me, but hopefully most of you have seen the videos and the photographs that are on our website and our social media and on Izumi's. It's a beautiful installation. Tell us about the process of creating this installation, because the process was such a part of the show. You were in the museum with our install team for weeks, and it was beautiful to watch.
Yes, thank you. After our initial meeting with you, Nicole, I started sketching and sort of trying to figure out the technical part. This piece, Marionette, was technically inspired by Japanese puppetry. So I looked up a lot of how they, hang the strings to each parts of the body of the doll. Japanese puppetry has a lot more numbers of lines to create these very detailed movements, and I was very fascinated with that, and I wanted to include that in this particular piece. So after sketching and figuring out the materials and technical stuff, I began to construct the 1x4 frames with the 1x4s and garden mesh to create the top platform, which also symbolizes window. And I used the mesh so that I could connect tight over or around 3,000 lines of yarn. And so that's kind of where I started. For the first phase one was to create the structure and tying about 18 to 20 feet length black yarn to each part. So after creating the frame, I made the outline of the body, human body laying. And within the outline, I filled it with these lines by tying them onto each little wire on the mesh. And so that was the phase one. And after that, I had museum team help me to transport it to the gallery. And then after that, Chris helped to hang that frame, which has 3,000 of yarn lines attached to all the way up to, I think it was 16 feet high, which ended up, we thought it was higher first, and then it was a little shorter. So I remember trimming the bottom after we could hang it. And thanks to Chris for leveling it so perfectly, because it was important that the lines were coming down, all of them were coming down straight. So that was phase two. Oh no, I'm sorry, that was the phase one. And then so phase two, from here and on, it was all kind of cool happening. But I had to make about 14,000 tiny paper clay balls. And before it dried, I made holes in the middle with a chopstick. And so after I make, a lot of balls, I sun dried them outside if it was nice, and then brought them back inside at night. And then it took about 36 to 48 hours for those balls to dry completely. Then I would dip them in the sumi ink bowls, and also using a tiny calligraphy brush, I would paint inside of the holes. So those are the parts that I couldn't share with you at the museum. But so after that, I would bring those balls to the museum. And also after Chris hung it, it wasn't so much the tangling, but I had to try to straighten the lines as much as possible. And that I had these yarn combing brushes and stuff, but those didn't work because of just the scale of it. And then I remember I ended up using the most familiar tool, which was my kitchen chopsticks to straighten the lines. And that took a lot more hours than I originally imagined, I remember.
Sort through thousands of strings with chopsticks was something I saw. for hours.
Yes. And then, but yeah, it worked. And then after that, everything was straight. And then the next phase 4, I visualized this body laying, but floating, and with amputated leg and, arm, some parts. And so I just visualized it and then started tying each balls onto the line. I started with like a little above the belly bottom part, because that was the highest part when the body's like this, and this is, kind of a little below the belly button. So I remember starting there and going slowly a little bit lower, imagining legs and torso, and then the head was the last. So that is those 4 phases were included in the making of it.
How many balls did you end up tying to the strings?
About 14,000.
Wow.
Yeah, and thank you for helping those balls. Like when I was like, oh no, there's a little paint missing. Can you color that part? And Nicole and Katie and everybody helped. So I'm really grateful for your team.
Of course, Katie and Chris are our preparators. We make Chris do all the things that are really high up.
Yes. Yeah, you had an amazing team.
Tell us a little bit about the subject matter of this. I know it's very personal, actually.
Yes, it is also personal, but I think, I do believe that personal subject having the entrance to universal subject and elements in life. So I'm actually really happy to share that personal influence coming to this piece particularly. And so even though when I was thinking about this piece and the other works that I make, I often think of these opposite elements like hope and fear, or distraction and construction, or separation and connection. So those seemingly opposite elements are always in my work one way or another. And that the thing that I always want to merge between those is that, even though they're so opposite, they're actually right there. They almost have to coexist in our life. And for this one, I wanted to, I was really compelled to make this piece being inspired by my personal experience of living with epilepsy, and especially the grand mal seizures. That part held so much fear in my memory, but also there was, sort of hopeful outcome. And so I didn't want to be shy about using it. And I have made other works that had the influence from the epilepsy and grand mal seizures. And so I decided to bring in the experience to be the inspiration for this piece. And so to do that, I kind of had to, dig my memories and how it was. And so I had grand mal seizures from the age 10 to 17. And it was, it took a big chunk of my youth time. And it was draining. It was very devastating for my mom and I. But, like when these kind of destroying and destructive events and happenings happen, it also is creating something new. I couldn't see it then, but now I look back and, I wouldn't be the same person if I didn't have the experience. So I'm almost grateful for that. But that time, physically and mentally, the amount of pain and the hopelessness and fear and all of it, like that went through, was quite traumatic. But also, like, when you're going through the grand mal seizures, you are completely, like, you have no control, and it's you lose the consciousness first, but then, like, just tiny bit of seconds, you do remember it's coming. So you kind of like, I remember feeling it's coming, and there's some part of me screaming like, oh, just stop, please, just don't come. But I'll be gone. my consciousness disappears. So I usually don't have any recollection of how exactly happens, but I do remember the shakes of my fingers and, you know, how it happens later from description by the doctor and, you know, family and friends. And it just kind of has this crazy waves of fear that comes and like, oh, I'm gonna lose it. I'm gonna be, you know, it just feels like you're going to be torn into hundreds of pieces, even though you don't. But it's just kind of that fear has that impact and a feel when you're going through it. And so that experience was definitely like, I wanted to respect that, and, you know, also wanted to use it in my art piece. And I thought this piece, also the puppetry elements of, you know, the lines controlling the body, and also that the viewers having a slight impact of the existence of this piece, because I know a lot of people couldn't visit yet, but when there's a slight wind, you know, generated by passers or air conditioner or any wind that comes through the silent museum, the piece moves just a little bit. And so that has sort of sensitivity elements in this piece. So yeah, but I'm also kind of celebrating or respecting the miracle of our body just having this form. And yeah, maybe I have extra appreciation for it because of what I went through when I was a kid. But it's just, I'm always amazed, you know, every day that like, wow, like it's just, I'm grateful that my body's functioning today the way it does. And it's just, you know, the deconstruction and construction, kind of like how you said in the catalog, and this life cycle, it's always happening internally, and also the relationship with the other outer world. And so all of it is kind of like in this piece for me, but definitely respecting the coexistence of destruction and construction in our body was a big part of it.
Mm-hmm. One time I heard you describe it as being pulled apart into a million pieces and put back together sort of at the same time. And every time I'm in the presence of this piece, I could feel that in my body, sort of trying to imagine that. But there's another reference in this piece, and what you can't see in the sketch is the 16 feet of yarn that's coming down, which is this really dramatic effect. And that has a visual reference to a phenomenon that I didn't know about before, which was the black rain that happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I'll explain it briefly. The black rain happened after the nuclear explosions in those two cities, and when nuclear fission particles of uranium and plutonium were carried into the atmosphere, and that phenomenon combined with the heat of the explosions led to rainfall almost immediately. That rain of those nuclear materials combined with all the carbon residue from all the fires that were happening created a black rain that was happening in those cities right after the bombings. It's terrifying to think about. Talk to us a little bit about your personal connection with that tragic history.
Yes, I always had certain fascination and almost obsession with certain images from history books around that time. And, you know, my other favorite time is in 1868 when Japan had the first influx of Western cultures and stuff. So, but for that, like the 1945 and around that time of, you know, it was, I'm not sure what grade, but I was in elementary school, and, you know, Japanese educational government, like department was not shy to show all these very graphic imageries from war and bombings, and being a highly sensitive person, it haunted me for a long time, and couldn't quite process because I was a kid. But that, you know, those times, like in the history, there are times when there's this tremendous destruction that happens, and new powerful creations also come to because of it. And so, so I was both, I was so fascinated in the both of how this nation kind of, or how, when people go through the destruction yet come back to construct something new and beautiful and strong. And so I was just kind of really had this fascination around that time. I would go to the library and read many manga books, which is a type of Japanese comic books, just about that very particular time of, when the bombing happened. And that, and then the textbook, history books, the images of objects that were left on the street and in the city, I think were my initial entry to being so obsessed with the idea of presence and absence. Like, so there were objects and the rain marks, black rains, or shadow traced onto the wall when there's no body. And so I kind of grew this fascination for like when the objects or lines or shadows, like, or clothes were left, like it was so powerful to think about the other, what was lost. So that was kind of how I began to be very interested in Black Rain. And then when I actually visited the Hiroshima Museum, they actually had the walls stripped from the street, and the clothes that were collected and, had the black dot stains on the surface. And I was like, oh, I think that's Black Rain. And then, I read the descriptions, and it was very powerful. And I don't think I ever had another experience where it's like I'm seeing the object, and it's so like it's such a powerful fear feeling that were conveyed from such still objects. And so that was, my experience from Black Rain. But I also read a lot about it, and then how it was such a sticky substance that were left on the skin. But people, it wasn't expected that was going to happen. And so people didn't know. It was sort of this like, whoa, what is this, scary, the rain shouldn't be black, but it's coming down like rain. And, like when we think of something that's coming down from the sky, it's always magical and beautiful. But this was the complete opposite case. So for me, like, I decided to use that visual design and this piece inspired by Black Rain, because this figure marionette also is holding a lot of fear. And so for me, like, if the Black Rain is balls of raindrops of fear, so that's kind of where the visually marionette and Black Rain merged a little bit. And so but also interesting thing is, like, these materials that I chose to use in this piece are also the most comfortable and familiar materials, like paper clay, yarn, sumi ink. Those are all holds very personally special meaning for me, as my grandfather was a carpenter, but he was also a calligraphy artist. And so his workspace had a big brush with, always sumi smell, and it was almost too much all the time. But I really, in the process, it was quite meaningful for me to visit that smell, and making paper clay bowls every day for 3 weeks and using yarn. And yarn holds a special meaning too, that like yarn is considered sort of a material that reflects storytelling. So each time when I choose to use yarn in my work, I'm aware and a little, conscious that I'm trying to convey some sort of stories to the viewers. And so all of these elements from materials, including the Black Rain, inspiring the visual and the concept of fear, came together.
It's a beautiful marrying of different concepts. You brought up time a couple times, which I definitely feel when I look at this piece there, you know, this person has been suspended falling. You've paused time. And by doing that, you've given us all a chance to consider a moment in time that maybe we normally wouldn't have in normal human perception of how time moves. Are you thinking about time and sort of stopping an ephemeral moment for consideration when you choose subject matter?
Yeah, I'm definitely always thinking about time one way or another when I'm making my piece, especially installation, I would say. And there's definitely influence from my own personal experience. If, you know, the piece has, that installation piece has a little bit of inspiration or influence from my seizure life. I think there's personally, there were just thousands of times that I just wanted to stop the movement, you know, the shaking of it. And for me and for my mom, and even it was, you know, it just felt so impossible. And I didn't even think about that possibility there, but the strong, devastating wish was like always there for me. So that could be where, you know, my fascination in art to want to make something that is frozen time moment. But I just in general, I did grow my love for visual images that seems like it just, somebody just froze that, you know, moment. And there's also, I think about the viewers, of course, when you're making, you know, sculpture or interactive installation or installation site specific. And I think I like to create the works that kind of slow down people's pace. It's kind of like, you know, when you're walking on the streets, in busy streets in Tokyo, and you get so stimulated, overstimulated, inspired, but you're also really exhausted and kind of anxious. But if you go to like very quiet countryside and say go into this snow igloo or something, and you go inside very quiet and just very still. So I feel like there's the relationship between what you are interacting, far or close, to how you perceive the space and time. And so that's definitely something I always consider. And, you know, I don't mind if kids are running around my piece, that's great too. but if there's, I'm more fond of artwork being able to slow you down just a little bit and enjoy the moment in a slower pace. So I'm very fascinated with the relationship of time and space, how we can enjoy an experience.
So last question that I give every artist. You've been in Taos for a while now. This exhibition was limited to artists who are either from Taos or have roots here. Can you tell us about your relationship with this place?
Yes, I visited Taos in 2007 the first time, and I arrived that night and it already got my heart that very moment when I stepped out the car, and there was just millions of stars right above me in Hondo. And I don't know, it was almost like, I don't know if I should believe this is happening. It's happening, okay. And from that moment, I think something shifted. And and then I moved here 2009. And Taos is very special for me. This is where I wanted to raise my children. And, you know, this is where but I also like all these vast natures and amazing night skies. It is also where I felt tiny again as a creature. But also this is where I kind of, you know, lost everything I thought I had. And I refound my purpose of life. And my gratitude for Taos and land and the people just go deeper every day.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Izumi, and thank you all for watching on Facebook Live. Join us next time on March 3rd for our interview with Patricia Michaels.
Thank you.